So, hello. Here in Google Earth, I've done research measuring distances between very important objects or structures on the surface of Earth. And I tell you now that I can prove that the creators of Giza knew the exact size and shape of Earth and the exact surface topography of Earth as accurately as we do today. And in just a minute, I'll talk more about that. On a larger scale, what I've discovered here in Google Earth is that there is a fundamental pattern or order to the surface of our planet when I've measured distances. And for example, then I've measured distances between mountains all around the world, and there is a clear pattern or order to those distances. I've also found then that the very locations of mountains is what this pattern orders. And it's not only mountains. I've also found that the most important and well-known ancient sites in the world, such as Giza, but there are others, this pattern determines the location of these sites. And I've also found, going forward in history, you could say, that cathedrals in Europe and government buildings in North America, United States and Canada, are also determined. The very location of them are determined by this pattern. I found all this measuring distances between such places here in Google Earth. Let's turn to Giza now as a first example. And here's how I've discovered this pattern that orders, for instance, then the location of Giza. Giza is right here because of these yellow lines. And more than these, but this is the first sample that is very clear. These are 6 distances from 6 of the highest mountains in the world to exactly Giza. Exactly the Giza plateau with the pyramids. And there is an order, there is a pattern to these distances. This is the pattern order I've been talking about. And here comes the order, the very pattern. When I show you Google Earth's measure tool now, we find this pattern here. Because this pattern in the distances here from mountains to Giza is determined by the units of measurement that we use to measure distance. And in this case, it's the meter and the yard that determines this pattern. Exactly the ratio, the proportion between the meter and the yard. Because these 6 distances from the highest mountain, their very peaks, the highest mountains in the world to Giza, is determined by the meter-yard ratio, exactly to Giza. And in the first measure video on this channel, I will measure these distances so you see the clear evidence for yourself. But this is still the introduction, the introductory video. So let me continue with this pattern, ordering the surface topography of Earth. And here are mountains in Europe, these distances right here. And they are ordered by the ratio between the meter and the yard also, the same pattern. The meter-yard ratio orders these mountain distances, and these are the big mountains in Europe, overall and regionally in Europe. So the same order there. And I said also that this pattern orders cathedrals, at least in Europe, where I measured. And here the example is cathedrals in England. That's what I've placed marked here, the Anglican cathedrals. What I found is that the very same pattern, and in this case, we're still talking about the ratio between the meter and the yard here. The very same pattern orders cathedrals in England, such that if you measure between cathedrals, you find one distance to be as 1 meter, compared to another which is as 1 yard, within the footprints of these buildings. And here I should also add that we have these units of measurement here to measure distance. And there are more ratios between them than the meter and the yard. We have many more, such as between the kilometer and the mile here. But the pattern I'm talking about, the big one, consists of the ratios between all of these units. So many ratios here. We also have, for instance, the kilometer-mile ratio, or that between the centimeter and the inch, and so on. So there are more ratios between these units. And this overall pattern I'm talking about consists of all of these ratios. In this introductory video, I'm pinpointing one of the ratios, namely that between the meter and the yard here. That orders then mountain distances to Giza, mountains here in Europe, first mountain distances to Giza, and then mountains here in Europe, and also cathedrals in England. But if we take cathedrals in England then as an example, other cathedral distances, when you compare them, they are ordered by the ratio between the kilometer and the mile. Or maybe it's between the kilometer and the nautical mile. But always, these units of measurement that we use today to measure distance, and the very ratios between them, that is what orders all of these structures. Cathedrals, here with the example of England, and mountains, here with the example of mountains in Europe, and just one ratio, and also distances from mountains to Giza. And with Giza, I'm also going to show examples how mountains, other mountains, zero in on Giza. And when you compare those distances, the order is the ratio between the kilometer and the mile, exactly from mountain peaks, so exactly Giza. And that I'll also get to in separate videos to show you that evidence. And going forward in time, as far as I've come, and the final category of buildings that I've found this pattern ordering those buildings. Here we have the example of government buildings, state capitol buildings in North America, the United States. They are also ordered by this pattern. For example, if you measure here between government buildings or state capitol buildings here in New England, you find that commonly that the ratio between the kilometer and the mile orders the exact location of these buildings when you compare distances between them. For instance, here we have from New York State Capitol to Connecticut. Connecticut there is as 1 kilometer, while New York State Capitol to Rhode Island State House is exactly as 1 mile. So the ratio here is 1 kilometer to 1 mile exactly. And that is common here. It occurs again and again, ordering the exact location of these government buildings. And that's true all across the United States and also the provincial legislative buildings in Canada. And that's as far as I measured. Government buildings in North America then. Cathedrals all over Europe, here simply with the example of cathedrals in England. And then mountains all around the world, here with a small example of mountains in Europe, ordered by just the ratio between the meter and the yard. But there are several other ratios then ordering mountains, and in Europe and all around the world. And then with the example of Giza as an ancient site, there are more ancient sites that conforms to this order. Giza, mountains to Giza ordered by here the ratio of the meter and the yard. And I'll show all of this as much as I can do in separate videos, the real measurable evidence. This was just an introductory video that is now over and done with.